Bruce Lee walked into a crowded gym, and no one looked up. He stepped through the door quietly, the kind of entrance that blends right in. The air was thick with that familiar gym smell, sweat mixed with rubber mats and a hint of cleaning spray from earlier in the day. It was one of those neighborhood spots, not fancy, just functional, with fluorescent lights buzzing overhead and posters on the walls faded from years of use. The place was packed, the way gyms get in the late afternoon when people filter in after work or school. Weights clanged against each other as someone racked a barbell, the metal echoing off the concrete floor. Grunts came from different corners, short, sharp ones from folks pushing through their last reps. In the background, music played from a small radio perched on a shelf in the corner, tuned to some rock station with guitars riffing over a steady beat. It wasn't too loud, but enough to fill the gaps between the sounds of effort. Conversations overlapped everywhere, like threads weaving through the noise. A group of guys near the free weights were chatting about their workout routines, one bragging about how he upped his deadlift by 20 pounds last month, another sharing tips on protein shakes, and which brand tasted less like chalk. Over by the treadmills, two women discussed their diets, comparing notes on low-carb meals and how to sneak in more veggies without hating every bite. Someone else was recounting what they lifted last week, laughing about a failed attempt that almost dropped the bar on their chest. It was all casual, the kind of talk that keeps the energy going in a shared space like this. Mirrors lined the walls, reflecting the whole scene back on itself. Rows of benches cluttered with water bottles and towels, squat racks loaded with plates that wobbled slightly under the weight, dumbbells scattered on the floor in no particular order, waiting for the next person to grab them. Mats were spread out in one area for floor exercises, a bit worn at the edges from constant use. Everyone moved with a sense of purpose, focused on their own goals. But there were those sideways glances too, people checking their form in the mirrors, adjusting a stance or a grip. And sometimes those looks lingered on others, watching how someone else handled a heavy set, maybe sizing up the competition or just curious about techniques. A couple of bigger guys dominated the bench press area. They were the type who filled out their tank tops, muscles bulging from years of consistent lifting. One of them was loading plates onto the bar, doing it with extra flair, sliding each one on with a deliberate clink that rang out louder than necessary. He lay back, gripped the bar, and started his reps, counting them out loud in a booming voice. 1, 2, 3. His spotter stood behind, hands ready, nodding along and encouraging with phrases like, "One more, come on, push it." It drew a few eyes from nearby, people pausing for a second to see if he'd hit his target. Not far away, another guy was at the cable machine, pulling down for tricep extensions. Between sets, he flexed his arms subtly, veins popping under the skin, and struck up chatter with a small group gathered around. He cracked jokes about weekend plans or gym fails, his laugh carrying across the room, pulling smiles and responses from the others. They laughed back, one slapping him on the shoulder, keeping the vibe light and social. Then there was someone else over by the dumbbell rack, finishing a set of curls. He hoisted the weights with controlled form, but on the last rep, he let one drop a bit harder than needed, the thud vibrating through the floor and turning a few heads for a moment. It wasn't aggressive, just that natural way some folks announce they're done, like a punctuation mark on their effort. The room kept moving, though people shifting from machine to machine, wiping down equipment, sipping from bottles. No one paid much mind to the new face who had just walked in. It was business as usual in a space full of routines and rhythms. Bruce found a corner near the wall, away from the main racks. It was one of those quieter spots, half hidden behind a row of unused kettlebells and a stack of yoga mats that no one had bothered to put away properly. The floor there was a little less scuffed, the rubber matting slightly cooler underfoot because it was farther from the heat of the crowded center. He set his small black bag down against the wall, unzipped it slowly, and pulled out a plain grey towel and a water bottle. No rush, no fuss, He folded his jacket neatly, placed it on top of the bag, then straightened up. He started warming up right there. Simple stuff anyone could do without drawing attention. Slow arm circles first, rolling his shoulders forward and back, loosening up the joints. Then he dropped into some light stretches, reaching one arm across his chest, holding it gently, switching sides. His breathing stayed even, almost silent. Next came bodyweight squats, knees tracking over toes, back straight, going down slow and coming up controlled. No bouncing, no counting out loud. Just 10 or 12 reps, steady. After that, push-ups on the floor, hands shoulder width, body in a straight line from head to heels. He kept them clean, chest close to the ground without sagging, then pushed back up smoothly. Again, no grunts, no dramatic exhales, just movement. He didn't look around the room once, didn't scan to see who was watching or check if anyone noticed the new guy in the corner, didn't wave at anyone familiar or try to join a nearby conversation. He stayed in his own bubble, eyes mostly on the floor or straight ahead at the wall, focused on what his body was doing. It was the kind of quiet concentration you see in people who've been training a long time and don't need the noise to keep going. A few minutes passed like that. Most of the gym kept its rhythm, clanks, laughs, footsteps shuffling between machines. But then one guy finishing his set on the incline bench paused. He was wiping sweat from his forehead with a small towel, mid-motion, when his eyes drifted over. He stopped wiping, towel still pressed to his skin, and just looked, held the gaze for a beat longer than normal. Then he nudged the elbow of the person next to him, a younger lifter who'd been spotting him. The spotter turned his head, followed the line of sight, and his eyebrows lifted slightly. A quiet comment passed between them, low enough that it didn't carry. Just a few words and a small head tilt toward the corner. The noise in the room didn't drop all at once. It never does in a busy place like that, but it shifted in small ways. Someone racking a heavy barbell did it with a softer clink than before, almost careful. A conversation a few feet away trailed off mid-sentence, one person glancing sideways, while the other kept talking but quieter now. Over by the heavy bag in the far corner, a fighter who'd been wrapping his hands paused with the tape half wound. He turned his body just enough to get a better angle without making it obvious he was staring outright. His hands kept moving, but slower, the focus split. It was subtle at first, like ripples starting from one small stone dropped in water. A couple more heads turned casually, pretending to adjust equipment or grab a drink, but their eyes lingered longer than usual. The energy in the room hadn't stopped. It had just started leaning in one direction, toward that quiet corner, where nothing loud was happening at all. Part 3, Bruce kept going. He transitioned smoothly into shadow work. No gloves, no bag, just empty space in front of him. His stance was balanced, feet shoulder width with one slightly forward, weight distributed evenly so he could move in any direction without telegraphing. He started slow at first, letting the rhythm build naturally. Hands came up in a loose guard, elbows tucked, chin slightly down. Then the movement began, crisp jabs snapping out straight from the shoulder, crosses following in tight arcs, hooks curling around an invisible target. Every strike landed with a soft whoosh of air, nothing exaggerated, no big wind-up. Footwork came alive underneath it all, small, precise steps sliding across the mat, pivoting on the balls of his feet, shifting angles without ever crossing his legs or losing balance. He circled an imaginary opponent, advancing and retreating in controlled bursts, always staying centered. Speed picked up in places, but never rushed. It felt like the pace was dictated by his breathing, steady and even. No dramatic finishes where he threw everything into one big combo and posed. Just consistent, flowing rhythm: strike, step, reset, strike again. The kind of work that looks simple until you try to match it. More heads turned now, less casually. The guy on the bench who'd been loud earlier, still lying back after his set, stopped talking mid-sentence to his spotter. His mouth stayed half open for a second, then closed as his eyes locked on the corner. The spotter followed his gaze without a word, arms dropping to his sides. Over by the dumbbells, a woman doing walking lunges slowed her steps until she was basically standing still, one foot forward, the other trailing. Weight shifted, but not moving. She tilted her head slightly, watching the patterns repeat. Even the person at the water fountain, a tall guy in a black hoodie who'd just filled his bottle, lingered there longer than anyone ever does. Cap still off, bottle in hand, he leaned against the wall and stared openly now, not bothering to pretend he was just taking a break. A couple near the squat rack finished their set early. One racked the bar quietly, and both stepped aside, crossing their arms, eyes fixed ahead. The gym felt smaller all of a sudden. The space that had seemed so spread out and chaotic started contracting toward that one quiet corner. Sounds dropped layer by layer. The constant clank of plates became single, deliberate noises, someone setting a bar down carefully instead of letting it crash. Voices grew shorter, quieter. Conversations that had been lively fizzled into half-sentences or trailed off completely. Laughter from the cable machine group died down to murmurs. Even the radio in the corner seemed farther away, the music fading into background static. People weren't pretending to train anymore. Sets got paused mid-rep, towels left draped over shoulders, phones forgotten in hands. Some leaned against equipment, arms folded, weight shifted to one leg in that classic "I'm just watching for a second" stance. Others stood completely still, mid-set, forgotten, dumbbells hanging loose at their sides. A fighter who'd been shadowboxing near the bags stopped entirely, gloves still on, breathing hard but eyes glued across the room. No one was loud about it. No one shouted, "Hey, look at that," or clapped. It was quieter than that, just a slow, collective pull of attention. The room had been full of separate orbits a few minutes earlier, everyone circling their own goals, their own mirrors. Now those orbits were tilting, drawn toward the one person who wasn't orbiting anyone else at all. He wasn't trying to draw eyes. That was the simplest part of it, and maybe the hardest thing for the room to process at first. No one saw him checking the mirrors to see if people were looking. He didn't pause after a sequence to catch his breath and glance around for nods or smiles. He didn't flex or pose, didn't wipe sweat off his face in a way that invited comments. There was no "watch this" energy, no big wind-up before a fast combination, no dramatic exhale like he'd just conquered something. He just kept moving through what he came to do, the same way he'd started. Steady, private, complete in itself. That absence of performance is what started pulling everything toward him. In a room full of people half training and half performing, counting reps louder when someone walked by, adjusting form when they caught a reflection, dropping weights with extra force to punctuate a set. Bruce was doing none of it. He wasn't competing for the space. He wasn't reacting to the noise or the glances or the small competitions happening around him. He stayed inside his own work, and because the work itself was so clean and unbroken, it became impossible to ignore. The shift wasn't sudden or loud. It built in quiet stages. One person after another found their attention anchored there, the way you sometimes can't look away from someone reading quietly in a busy cafe. The guy who'd been joking at the cable machine earlier turned his back to his group entirely now, arms loose at his sides, watching without speaking. His friends followed suit, one by one, until the little circle dissolved and everyone faced the same direction. The woman with the lunges had set her foot down and stayed planted, hands on her hips, breathing slow. The water fountain guy finally screwed the cap back on his bottle but didn't move. He just stood there, leaning, eyes steady. After a while, maybe 15-20 minutes total, he stopped. Not with a flourish. He simply let his hands drop, shook them out lightly once, then stepped back to neutral. He walked the few steps to his bag, picked up the grey towel and wiped his face and neck in the same calm rhythm he'd used for everything else. Took a slow sip from the water bottle, capped it, set it down, folded the towel once, placed it inside the bag, slipped his jacket back on, zipped it halfway. Every motion deliberate, unhurried, like the training hadn't ended so much as transitioned into the next ordinary thing. When he walked toward the door, heads followed without trying to hide it anymore. A few people nodded, small, almost private movements, the kind you give when you don't need words, but still want to acknowledge what you just saw. One older lifter near the entrance lifted his chin slightly in greeting as Bruce passed. Bruce returned it with the barest dip of his head. Nothing more. No handshakes, no conversation starters. Just that quiet exchange. No one said much after he stepped out. The door closed behind him with a soft click. For a long stretch, longer than you'd expect, the room held on to the silence he'd left. Plates didn't clang right away. Conversations didn't restart at full volume. Someone finally moved to adjust the radio, but even that felt tentative. People exchanged, looks quick, wordless glances that said they'd all seen the same thing and weren't quite sure how to pick up where they'd left off. The room stayed quieter a long time after he left, not because anyone forced it, but because the usual rhythm had been interrupted by something that didn't need volume to be noticed. When he walked in, no one noticed. The door had opened and closed behind him like it did 100 times a day. Footsteps on the mat, a quick scan of the room maybe, then straight to the corner. No one paused their set. No one broke conversation. No heads turned. The clanging plates, the overlapping voices, the radio playing low in the background, they all kept rolling exactly as they had been. He was just another person entering the space, blending into the background noise the way a new face does in a busy place. Invisible for those first minutes, because nothing about his arrival demanded attention. When he left, no one went back to what they were doing right away. The door clicked shut softly, the same quiet sound it had made when he entered. But the room didn't snap back. The rhythm that had been there before, loud counts on the bench press, jokes at the cable machine, dumbbells dropping with punctuation, didn't restart on cue. Plates stayed racked a little longer. Someone who'd been mid-rep on squats stood up straight, bar still on their shoulders, but didn't lower it again right away. The woman near the lunges zone finally took a step, but it was slow, almost reluctant, like she was still carrying the image of what she'd just seen. A few people exchanged looks across the room, quick, wordless glances that said they'd all felt the same shift. One guy near the water fountain finally screwed the cap on his bottle and set it down, but he didn't walk away. He just stood there a moment longer, arms loose. The older lifter by the entrance, who'd given the small nod as Bruce passed, leaned back against the wall, towel over his shoulder, staring at the empty corner like it might still hold something. The radio kept playing, but someone reached over and turned the volume down a notch without anyone asking. Conversations tried to restart, but they came out quieter, shorter. "You see that?" one person murmured to another, voice low enough not to carry far. A nod in response, then silence again. The guy who'd been loud on the bench earlier sat up, wiped his face, and looked around like he'd forgotten what set he was on next. His spotter didn't prompt him. They both just sat there for a beat. It wasn't dramatic. No one clapped when the door closed. No one rushed over to ask who that was. The change was quieter than that, just a lingering stillness that settled over the gym like dust after something heavy has been lifted and set down. People eventually moved again, picking up dumbbells, adjusting weights, stepping back under bars. But the usual urgency wasn't there yet. Sets felt half-hearted for a while. Glances kept drifting back to the corner, even though it was empty now. The room had been full of separate energies when he walked in, everyone pulling in their own direction, performing just enough to be seen. By the time he left, those energies had tilted towards something simpler, something that didn't shout. And that tilt didn't reset the second the door closed. It stayed, soft but stubborn, for longer than anyone expected. When he walked in, no one noticed. When he left, no one went back to what they were doing right away. The gym didn't snap back to normal that day. Not fully. Not for the rest of the session. People moved again. Eventually, someone loaded plates onto a bar with a softer clang than usual. Another picked up where they'd left off on curls, but without the extra thud at the end. The radio got turned back up a notch, but the volume felt tentative, like the person adjusting it was still half listening elsewhere. Conversations restarted in fragments, short exchanges about sets, quick agreements on who was next for the rack. But the energy had shifted, quieter at the edges, less showy. The guy who'd been flexing at the cable machine earlier didn't strike another pose between reps. He just worked. The bench press duo spoke lower, their encouragement shorter, almost private. A few lingered near the corner where Bruce had trained, not touching the equipment, just standing there for a moment like they were measuring the space he'd occupied. One younger lifter walked over, looked down at the mat as if checking for footprints, then shook his head slightly and walked away. No one asked out loud who he was, not yet. In a place like that, questions come later, over water breaks or in the locker room. But the looks said enough. They'd seen something ordinary turn extraordinary without anyone announcing it. Hours later, when the gym started emptying out, a couple of regulars stayed longer than usual. They wiped down machines slowly, packed bags without hurry. The lights stayed on a bit past closing as someone finished a last set in near silence. The room felt different still, the same walls, same mirrors, same scattered dumbbells, but the air held onto that quiet pull a little longer. It's the kind of thing that happens sometimes in shared spaces. One person does their work without fanfare, and the whole dynamic tilts, not because of size or noise or show, because of the absence of all that. Because focus without performance is rare enough to stop a room. When he walked in, no one noticed. When he left, the place remembered.